Oh yeah, sexy biscuits. Nice.
London Blues 1975. A YouTuber is on the rise. Reviewing games late at night and sometimes friends used to bug him. Lord Wars Blues 1975.
Hey YouTube, Numbers Post 1975, and you've read the title. I want to talk about the computers that you had when you were at school. You know, your first experience for most people with a computer, at least if you're of my similar age or vintage, I should say, would be at school. And I think it's an interesting topic because dependent upon your age, it's going to completely vary. Now, in this country, also I want to say quickly, the reason I want to talk about this is we all have various, age differences in our group of friends. It's just part and parcel of life. You know, the circles of people you travel with, you will have friends, they will have younger friends, they will have older friends, and obviously the same thing applies to people at work who also become your friends. I have a group of people in my, immediate friend circle who are, I'm in my 40s. They're in their mid-20s, so it's a completely different experience to them for their first experience with computers at school, and especially in their case, realistically, they probably would have experienced them at home as well. Their dad may have had a PC or something like that, and therein it's a really interesting bit because I'm pretty sure for, pretty much after 1992, maybe 1993, it was the case with my school, that the template for the machines you would have at school would be PCs. And so from then right up to now, it would be basically the same. Now, some people I've talked to just said, we were lucky, look at what we got. We had state-of-the-art tech. Your stuff was archaic, but then state of the art, that descriptive term is relevant to the time you were in when you had those machines. So, I mean, ours was groundbreaking what we had at the time. So this kind of floated my boat as a topic. I'd love to know what machines you grew up with at school, dependent upon your age, dependent upon your country. All two people from outside the United Kingdom who watch my channel. I mean, you're going to know what it is because I've talked about my first experiences with computers, but I've not talked about in depth with them at school. But obviously I was born in 1975, and the computer industry, because UK was the biggest manufacturer of computers anywhere in the world in the early 80s, and I think people seem to forget that fact because of how far we have fallen now. I don't think we fucking manufacture anything, do we? So it was literally an industry that just blew up. It was everywhere, and the government took notice of this. So you had Spectrum, you had Acorn, BBC Micros, which are obviously Acorn, then you had the Dragon 32, and you had this whole plethora of different machines all vying for a piece of the pie, which ultimately wiped them out and only left a few contenders. But the government at the time realised that this brand new technology was absolutely exploding, clearly going to be the path of the future, and they were very wise about this. So they teamed up. I'm sure you all know this. Watch the movie with Paul Freeman, Micromen. It's a docudrama played for laughs, and it's not entirely accurate, but the actual story of this getting a computer, because that's what the government wanted, one computer in every school so every child could experience this new thing that was going on. It was basically going to be, the driving force of the future. It was going to be everywhere. I mean, this was a brilliant vision that they had. So they teamed up with the BBC, and there was going to be a 10-week program. I believe it was called Micro Live. I do remember watching it as a kid, but it never showed enough games for me because in 1982 I would have been 6. But it was it was an educational program that was screened on the BBC in the evening, and it was all about accompanying these machines, which was a competition, or I say a competition. Basically, you had to vie for the right to be a machine that would be branded by the BBC, a BBC machine, to end up in every school. And micro machines, no, that's a toy mini car. Micromen covers this absolutely brilliant because obviously Acorn won, you know, right at the end, and Spectrum did not, and they produced a machine. And it became branded as the BBC. There were two. There was a Micro B and a Micro A. I forget which one was the high-end one and which one was aimed at homes. I want to say the B was aimed at homes, but then, to be fair, I don't honestly know. So anyway, they won this contract and they produced these machines, and the government, obviously, they funded it, and they got one in pretty much every school out there. At home at this point, the kind of, you know, nearest tech you would have to a computer, because you couldn't really afford them until Spectrum came along. I mean, you could afford the BBC, but the Spectrum was the truly, and the ZX80 and the ZX81, truly affordable machine, but it was still out of the reach for most people, and that's why they wanted it in schools. But the tech you would have at home in most cases would be like Pong machines and stuff like that, because we had a binary Pong machine, and maybe an Atari VCS or 2600 if you were lucky. So we got all these computers, because I'm starting off, you know, with my memories of what we had in schools with primary school, because that was my first experience of computers, and that got the bug in me that ultimately led, I've touched upon this part of the story so many times, to my dad buying a computer, which was the ZX Spectrum, and the rest was history. Became absolutely, you know, in love with this new spangled technology, but also ultimately it made me a gamer. So I remember in 1982 I would have been 6. So there were, at my primary school, there were 3 classes. There were infants, there was basically juniors, and then there was the final class. Literally 3 porta cabins. My school was tiny. I don't think there was more than maybe even 120 kids there. It was an absolutely tiny school. My secondary school wasn't particularly big. Might have been the average for what was around the country at the time, but we'll get to that when we get to you know, my experience with computers at secondary school. So there was one computer, a BBC Micro, in my primary school, and this absolutely blew us all away, because my experience, as I said, at this point with tech was the a binary Pong machine. I actually have managed to purchase one which was the same as the one we had as a family, and we kind of knew about, you know, computers and stuff like that even as young kids, because it was on the news and it was in the media everywhere, you know, like look at this rapidly changing world and this new form of technology that's going to change absolutely everything. How many manufacturers are making machines for the UK market? As I said, pretty much most of them fell to the way. And before this explosion of cheap machines in the UK, there were computers, you know, there were computers from the late 70s and early 80s, but they were just far beyond, you know, the means of a family. They were basically 100% business. You know, they were for, you know, yeah, companies, basically. So we got this BBC Micro in my school, and every kid got to have a go on it for an allotted time, which even with a small school of 100+ kids, it couldn't have been easy, you know, doing that. And we got to experience the very early days of edutainment, and I can very strongly remember that for my go on this machine at my primary school, and honestly it blew me away. You had to have a monitor, didn't you, with the BBC? Was it a Cube? But it was only spelled C-U-B. Couldn't plug it into a TV, is my understanding. And also you had that little, if this is the computer, right, function keys are here. As I'm looking at it, the return key is here. Outside of the keyboard here, there was that little square with like perforated holes that you could push out. Don't know if you're supposed to push it out. Don't know if it was an expansion port. All I know is, when you got something with perforated holes, don't leave it around young kids, because boom, there you go. And it just used to accumulate crap and dust and shit in there. Teachers couldn't have been happy, but to be fair, I don't think they paid for it. So yeah, my first experience with a computer with the BBC at school was a maze game where you started in the middle as a mouse. Very crude graphics. I mean, it's the BBC. And it's 1982. Although the BBC was a pretty capable machine, my heart forever will be with the ZX Spectrum, which is the greatest machine ever made in the history of mankind. And if you disagree, you're just wrong, and I will fight you for that. But so this maze game, and you had to type crude words to match the words on the screen and propel your mouse further away from the cat till you got to the edge of the maze, and you would win the game. I remember being incredibly pissed off and incredibly upset because of my turn on this. I'm 6, I'm trying to type the words, and I couldn't think of the right letter I needed. There was a girl behind me called Susan, who was a couple of years older, because I would have been in the juniors and not the final class, you know, where you get ready for going to secondary school. And she kept saying, "It's M, it's M, it's M." And she got so frustrated with me not knowing what to do. She went in and she pressed N, which was the wrong key, obviously, and it terminated my go. And then that, you know, the teacher came and said, "Right, your time is up, Dave. Go away," and brought someone else in. And I was incredibly pissed off, even only being Ickle Dave. That's my, you know, earliest memory of the BBC. And then later on there was a really crude adventure game we played. Very limited, very limited. Not like a text adventure that you will get later on, obviously on the BBC as well, and like on the Spectrum, you know, like the stuff like Sinclair made or published, like Ship of Doom and stuff like that, and Espionage Island, I believe that's what it was called. My brother Jason loved those and he completed them all. This was literally, you know, west, south, north, east, and very crude, you know, like commands to pick up stuff and solve. Again, it was edutainment, puzzles and things like that. But me and my brother Ian were really good at it, and we actually mapped it. We went home, we loved it so much, it made such a big impression on us that we drew little maps and stuff like that. And then every time we could get to play it, because sometimes they would let you play the game you wanted to play when they didn't have anything to teach you in the afternoon, were bored or being lazy or just wanted, you know, to wash their hands of you, and would just have computer time. And we used to love playing this game, no idea what it was called, and we would rinse and repeat it like every time we got to play it. Even back then, as 6-year-olds, we were legends. Now, we came home and we told my dad about this, and we're like, "Oh my god, we got a computer at school. It's the most amazing thing I've ever seen in the history of the world ever." And so he thought, there's something in this, you know, this is a good thing to get my kids into. Not only is it, you know, education and stuff like that, but it will teach them invaluable tools for the future, which is obviously what the government were thinking when they started this program. And yeah, so he bought us a ZX Spectrum 48K, and as I've mentioned many times, we did nothing with it but play games. And from my perspective, and I mean, it's when it comes to what you can do with certain computers and other computers, such as the Spectrum versus the Micro, normally Spectrum versus Commodore 64, never thought I'd say Spectrum versus BBC Micro in the same sentence. One, you know, is not necessarily better than the other, because it's horses for courses and things like that, but ultimately, after we got the Spectrum and all we did was play games, and in '82, you know, early games, although Ultimate Play the Game were, you know, banging out absolute bangers and stuff like that, not so much, you know, blown away by the BBC anymore, because we had pretty much something that was completely on the same level, if not a little bit better, again, depending on what you want from these machines at home. But that was my earliest experience, and like I said, credit to the government with this program to get, you know, what was going to be the future, and they called it, they absolutely called it, into every school, so every child could experience, you know, credit to them. Whether or not they do something like that today, I don't know, because they're too busy arguing within themselves and complaining about they haven't got the money to do fuck all. But yeah, that was my earliest memories of a computer, and then obviously it inspired my dad to buy a Spectrum. He thought we were going to learn to program and he could retire off us. No, we just played games all the time. Everyone I know who got a machine like that, that's all they did. So anyway, first experience of a computer was the BBC. Then, in 1987, I went to secondary school. Well, I say I went. My twin obviously went with me as well, and my older brother was already there. Big school, very intimidating, but you would think, and obviously they did, that they would have, you know, much bigger, better, expansive computer learning program for the kids. And they did, and they didn't. But again, I remember it very fondly, because we had a computer class. There was one building in the entire school that obviously, and we had 1,000 kids at secondary school. And to put this into perspective how technology works, because I'm going to talk about what they had there, in 1988 I had a Master System, still had a Spectrum as a family computer. In very late 88 or early 89 I had a Japanese Mega Drive. Then after that I had a Super Famicom. So at some point, even though these weren't computers but they were consoles, they were clearly more impressive at what they were putting out on the screen than what I had access to at secondary school, which is basically this is where you make or break yourself, isn't it? This is your main education process. This is the minimum education that you have to get by law, whether you choose to go any further, you know, college, sixth form college, and then subsequently more and more after that. This is the education that will shape you. It's the formative years of your life. So 1987. The other thing I want to say, which I didn't touch upon at the start of this video, but did want to quickly mention, is it's an interesting thing to talk about, because my school, I'll give you spoilers for what we had in the secondary school, my computer history and the machines I played at school was predominantly, I'm pretty sure there was an Archimedes though, but we'll get to that. And we never got to use that. That was basically our CDT teacher and technical design teacher, technical drawing design teacher, woodwork teacher, metalwork teacher. That was his baby and his toy, and he just used to basically show it off to us, but do not touch, do not touch. To be fair, it was probably worth a couple of grand, the whole setup. We'll get to that. It wasn't just a computer, but it was. But yeah, so I don't suppose he wants kids, you know, fucking around with his baby and shit like that. Even though it wasn't his, it was the school. So shame on you, Mr. Evans. You should have let us have a pop. Still remember that. Really wanted to play around with this thing. Anyway, jumping ahead of myself. But the point is, over the years when I've done these videos and I've done vlogs and I've talked about machines, people have left comments, oddly enough, in the comment section, walked into that one, where they say, hey, my machine actually had Amigas, and my school actually had Amigas, and so on. I said, my school actually had Atari STs. Both of those were released in 1987, so, you know, that's a possibility for sure. I guess it comes down to how much money or funding your school had, or how big it was, or how small the classes were, which obviously makes these things more doable than some other schools. And one even said that they had a series of Archimedes, which is Acorn Archimedes, because obviously the same people who made the BBC, and then the Electron, which was a cut down BBC, which didn't make it into schools, or maybe it did, which is why I'm asking this question. But the computer class in my school that everyone had one lesson a week in, which was a full hour, had 30, are you ready for this, 30 BBC micros. And so basically you had your whiteboard at the end. Are we even allowed to say that now? I don't know. Whiteboard at the end of the room. This was Mr. Miller's class. He said one of the stupidest things I've ever heard anyone say, who was supposed to be the person who was teaching us and educating us and preparing us for the future of computers. I'll tell you now. He said, there's this brand new amazing thing coming out. This was a couple of years later from me walking straight in, you know, it's the first year in 1987 and seeing this room. But he said, yeah, there's this brand new thing coming out and it's called email, and it is basically instant electronic mail, you know, and it goes down the phone lines. So instead of you posting a letter, snail mail and stuff like that, you can just do it by a computer if the other person has a computer at the other end and things like that. But he said, but don't get used to it because it really isn't going to last. Yeah, ladies and gentlemen, my computer teacher, Mr. Miller, he was also my maths teacher. Maybe that's why I got a D and I had to resit it. You. Anyway, so they're like 30 BBCs. So you have your whiteboard here, then all around the outside of the room there were BBCs, and and each desk would sit 2 people, because you see videos and pictures and stuff like that, and everyone has the ones where all these BBCs are next to each other and you sit at the desk and you face forward. Now you sat around the outside. Each desk could hold 2 people. Each machine had a monitor. But they didn't have, this is where I get confused, because I don't know, my knowledge, you got to remember, like, in, what am I, 11, 12, in 87, can you network BBCs? I mean, because all I know is when you could play games, but we'll get to that a little bit later on, you had a menu of games to choose from, because these things did not have it. I mean, there were a couple that actually had disk drives and tape drives and stuff like that for, you know, specific reasons or tasks or things like that, obviously to show us how these things worked and this new tech and how to input information or data into the machine and back up data and things like that. But when you did get to play games, this is why I'm like, did you network it, or was it something for each machine? People out there know a lot more than me. Obviously, like I said, if you went to school before 1982, you wouldn't have got to experience any of this. So I'm not expecting a great many comments of people who are older than me, basically. But yeah, there was definitely a menu where you could select games, and there was a limited number of games. But we were taught very, very rudimentary things, but it was still mind-blowing, even though, as I said, at home at this point I had a Spectrum, and I did dabble with programming. I dabbled with the programs you got that you wouldn't input yourself, you know, in the middle of certain magazines. in the early days, because a lot of them dropped them, but like Sinclair usually used to do it in the early days, and that was the initial magazine of choice that my parents used to buy us, until I found the dizzying highs of Crash magazine and bought that myself. But yeah, so I had a little bit of knowledge of programming, but yeah, and it was basic commands and stuff like this. So they gave everyone a crack at this. They print you out these little, you know, like crib sheets and stuff like that, and you would try and do it, and you make your name repeat across the screen, multicolored loads and loads of times, and you felt like a champ and a winner, even though, as I said, because in 1988 I had a Master System, not a computer, can't do the same things as this, but obviously the things I'm experiencing on it, sound wise and game wise, was way ahead of this, because, and I can't be the only one whose schools were still rocking BBC micros in 1980. What would a PC cost in 1987? Was it even financially plausible to then? Because obviously, even though they were still expensive over the subsequent years, and when obviously they became staple in the early 90s, the price, expensive that they were, would have come down from what they would have been in the late 80s, when, you know, I went to secondary school and this was our computer class, a room full of BBCs. It must have been completely unaffordable, like through the roof, tits expensive. But yeah, and then we had very crude word processing sort of programs and stuff like that, which I can see why they would get you to dabble with it, and like data input, spreadsheets, really crude by any standards, you know, not even by today, but like a couple of years later, when obviously the PCs properly kicked in. But we had this, and it was, again, it was you know, a lot more involved and advanced from getting a mouse out of a maze from primary school. It was definitely in the right direction of, look, the future, you need to get your heads around this. I do wonder to this day if this is where, like, you know, because I worked in IT for 15 years, where the bug for me, not just games, but I did get something ingrained in me from these crude experiences that, you know, led me, at least, you know, for those 15 years, into a life of IT. Because that's how I ended up moving to Canada for 4 years, being seconded by my company. Was they needed someone who had experience of the in-house software that I supported in the Bristol, you know, base of operations, and it had just been rolled out in North America, you know, and specifically in Canada and Montreal. So that's why I got to go there. So obviously I got something from these crude early days, even if it was just the bug in me. So I pursued it, and obviously my mate Andy, I told you my nostalgic memories of my first PC, or when I was a PC gamer, continued that on. But if I didn't have it, would I have gone that route, you know, even with him, and when he started building PCs and I wanted to buy one off him? Anyway, so this was my experience. So secondary school, primary school, BBC. It was always the BBC. I mean, even then, like, that's still, even if they're, because they're 5 years old at this point in 87, that's still a serious chunk of money. So we got to do boring stuff on them and things like that in the hour, 1 hour, mind, 1 hour lesson of, was it called computer science? I know it was at other schools. I always find that a bit of a weird descriptive term for what you're actually doing, you know. But yeah, my hour of, you know, and everyone else, you know, in my year, and obviously across the school, and I guess if you got older you may have used them for different things, and we obviously subsequent years after that, when they still had these, you would still have other computer-based classes, just not once every week for an hour. But yeah, so I loved it. I loved it, and that's why I'd still, even though I'm, you know, obviously a Specky fanboy, have a very big place in my heart for the BBC. I mean, it was a fantastic machine. It really was, and there were games on it, but it was clearly aimed more at education. And it's funny, and I guess, could you say business? Because Clive Sinclair, even though his machine was a massive, massive, massive success, far more successful than the BBC, which was not unsuccessful, he always felt a little bit annoyed that there wasn't more serious sort of work-based and educational software on it, whereas the people who make the BBC were kind of like Acon, a little bit kind of gypped, you know, that there weren't more games available for it. There were, you know, decent chunk, but no one like the Spectrum. No one had a library like the Spectrum apart from the Commodore 64. I guess for those two camps, it's the grass is always greener on the other side. Anyway, what happened next was, because lots of people talk about how their school had computer club, and you could go after school, after the school day had finished, and you could go and you could play on the computers for fun, and in some cases people would bring them in. I've heard that, you know, headmasters who were particularly into this and stuff like that, and other teachers would bring in their own kit from home. Sadly, ours never did, and that's where would be kids, you know, would get to experience Amigas and Atari STs. Bear in mind, when I got my Mega Drive, That's when my brother had an Atari ST, and then a little bit later on he upgraded to Amiga. So at that point, definitely at that point in 89, 1990, in my house, computer-wise, thanks to my twin brother Ian, we had far more fucking advanced, superior, better hardware than my school had, which was, you know, the people who'd been gifted with the task of preparing me for the future of computers. Yet we had better stuff at home, and I'm sure that was the case for a lot of people. But once a week, and I think this kicked in from about the second year, third year, our fourth and fifth year I was just in, you know, console town and didn't really care so much. But they would open it up on a Thursday at lunchtime for an hour, first come, first served. Once each machine had 2 people on it, then they shut the door. Sorry, we can't have any more. So you literally used to leg it to the dinner hall, shove some shit down your throat as quickly as you could, because obviously you weren't allowed to eat or drink around this tech, because they'd have a cow, wouldn't they, and shit their pants watching kids getting crumbs and juice and rubbish all over these machines, especially since, much like the one I had at primary school, someone had pushed in those perforated hole things. What were they for? I'm sure there was food and crap in them anyway. But so yeah, you leg it to the canteen, the dinner hall, shove some shit down your throat, and then you get there to this place as quickly as you could, because you could not go up straight away, because they go, have you had dinner? No, you're not coming in. You're not coming in. You have to eat something. So, you know, there was this 15-minute grace period, and then if anyone showed up before then, it was pretty much, I think you're lying. I owe it to your parents and you, your well-being, health and nutrition, to eat something. Although health and nutrition, if you saw the shit that we ate back then, I had beans, chips and fried fish, battered fried fish, every day for pretty much my entire duration of secondary school. Apart from the first year where we took packed lunches, because obviously 3 boys, a little bit expensive. But yeah, and so you had an hour, and again, this is my love of machines, and more so competitive gameplay, which is a very strong descriptive term for the games I'm about to tell you, because as I said, better shit going on in my house than it was on the games on these machines. But it was that first experience, you know, of playing it with your mates, and a bunch of the slightly older kids who would go in there, they would always fire up Elite, and I could never wrap my head around that. I mean, it was on the spectrum. I still can't, I'll be honest, I still can't wrap my head around it now. Still, like, I understand its technical brilliance, truly first open world game, you know, and how it's, even by today's standards, what it was doing back then, it's just incredible and phenomenal. It's definitely just never floated my boat. But there were always kids playing that. But even they would complain, and knew at the time, which is because they couldn't save it, it's such a big and massive game. What are you going to achieve in 45 minutes? We played Tank, which was, and as soon as I describe it to you, I might get some of the names in these wrong, but basically tank on either side of the screen of various tanks, and you had to work out your trajectory. I think it's on the Atari 2600, it was on everything, and fire bombs at each other, taking it in turns to blow up your mate. Again, better stuff at my house, but this was fun as tits, blowing up your mates. The other one was Dogfight, where you were 2 planes, there was a floor and trees, couldn't hit the floor, you could only rotate left, clockwise or anti-clockwise, and fire, and you had to dogfight each other and blow each other up. I absolutely loved that one, but one that everyone played, and it was more so one go than the next go you mate, because as I said, you paired up 2 people per each machine, was Chucky Egg. Chucky Egg, I first played on the BBC, and I first played at school, and even I can admit it's a far superior game on the BBC than it is to the Spectrum. I wouldn't say actually it's night and day, it's just a better version. I guess was that the first machine it was written for, but everyone loved Chucky Egg. I mean, second year, 88, you know, 89, Master System, Mega Drive, I'm playing stuff like, you know, Hang On, Space Harrier 2, things like this, but I still absolutely adored Chucky Egg. Let's just put something into perspective though. I'm still playing my Spectrum, even though I had, you know, those other machines, you know, back then at the time. But this 1 hour a week, or 45 minutes, because they made you eat, what an inconvenience, eating. Eating fried food. This was, I remember it so well. I remember it absolutely fantastically. But I didn't get to experience. Now, I don't want to say I felt short, you know, changed with stuff like this, because I have such nostalgia and such fond memories of these moments, you know, particularly earlier on, like primary school, when it like woke me up to this whole new world as a 6-year-old. and seeing it all over the news and stuff like that. And there was a program that, like I said, or maybe not, accompanied this process of getting a BBC into, or computer into every school, called Microlight, that ran for 10 weeks with a cartoon owl that flew through the window. Pretty sure I've already mentioned that. But the thing is, that was just an experience in itself. You generally, as a young child, even though, you know, you're very young at the age of 6 and stuff like that, and can't really process everything that's going on around you, but you did know that there was something very important, something very special about this. And obviously when the news told you it was big and important, as a kid, you just fucking sucked it all in and just went, they said it, it must be so. But I finished, you know, like your required education in 1992, which is where my brother went to college at Western, but I decided to do sixth form college at my secondary school, because they had a sixth form college on the same grounds, which basically meant, you know, whatever you chose, it was further education, but you had the luxury of all the infrastructure that already existed from your schooling days. And yeah, so when I left in 1992, I would have left school without experiencing anything other than the BBC Micro, and PCs are around now. So it wasn't until I came back as a, you know, for sixth form college as a sixth former, that they finally got PCs, and I'm pretty sure, well, they must be, it was all 386s. So they didn't have 30, I think they had about 20. Same setup. I'd love to know what they did with the BBCs. Did they bid them? Did they sell them? Did they sell them to people at home and stuff like that? They must have still had some knocking around. Oh, there's one other thing I want to quickly go before I get to, you know, when I'm a sixth former. Sorry, jumping ahead of myself. It is me in my defence. But CDT, which was basically technical drawing, and bit of woodwork, bit of metalwork. I always like the technical drawing stuff like that. You know, the 3D lines and stuff, where you would draw lines in from the side like that, and then draw down. So you know what? How you were taught to do 3D technical drawing at school. You know, Mr. Evans. Who I believe he was an ex-military boy, because I never liked how strict he was. You know, fair play, seriously well done, respect people who go into the armed forces, but whenever they come back into schools and stuff like that, and they try to install this sense of discipline, I mean, I was raised to respect people and stuff like that, never really spoke out of turn or anything like that, never acted like a complete bellend or rude to other kids like that, you know. But when you got that level of discipline, you're trying to install it into 12 and 13-year-olds. You just make us resent you. But anyway, I'm pretty sure, even though I never saw one in the flesh, so this would have been like second or third year, I'm pretty sure what he had was an Archimedes, and it was the only one in the school. And I don't know why he had it, because maybe sixth form, well, I never did when I was a sixth former, but then it was PCs then. Maybe some kids were lucky enough, like the brown nosers and ass kissers, to get to use it. But he had one, and he used to show it to us all the time. And obviously we actually had a class on it to show you what it was. And it was the future of technical drawing, because you did it in a computer. And there was this kind of greyish machine, you know, very much in the mould of an Amiga and Atari ST. You know what these machines look like. They all followed a template, but pretty sure it was Amiga, mouse and stuff like that. And he had an art package, and well, it was a technical drawing package, so it wasn't like freehand and stuff like that. But he'd do all this stuff, and you could, like, was it like an AutoCAD program? Make amazing things. And he had something called a plotter. Now, I'm pretty sure that's what it was called, and it was a big board like this, and down the right-hand side, there were a whole bunch of, like, pen tips with a chunk of ink behind them, you know, in like a little container. They're all different colour, and they're like metal arms like that with a grabber on it, like, you know, like Robocop's aiming. I'm doing a very bad description of this. So it would go like that and stuff like that. Pick one up, and whatever he put on the screen, he could send to this plotter. And he used to show it to us, and like, it truly blew my mind. That must have cost a fortune. So that was something I got to experience, but not hands-on. But on all of this on his computer, and he's sending it down to that thing there, and it's drawing it. The machine is alive. That impressed me. I'm pretty sure it was me, Archimedes, but never ever got to try. I don't know any kid, like I said. But anyway, so when I came back in sixth form, we finally have networked 386s, and yeah, this was when we were taught proper, like, sort of, you know, Microsoft stuff. We were taught Word. We love Word, because when we had computer, because they still had computer club, and we still went in it, even though, you know, we're like 16, 17, 18 at this point, just so we could type words in. It was all movie quotes. Type words in, movie quotes in Word, make it absolutely massive, and then print it off on a dot matrix and make absolutely massive banners and stick it in the common area of just juvenile shit. And you could literally, because they couldn't really stop us doing it, but they just see teachers looking at us like this and just going, wow, really, that's what you're doing? Ladies and gentlemen, the future of our country. But yeah, this is when I got to experience PCs for the first time. And yeah, so it was Excel, Word, and all that good stuff, and Solitaire, because that was the only game on them. But, so like I said, that must have been some tidy money spent then. So I never actually got to experience PCs, which obviously become the staple and template, I guess, of every computer in every school at this point onwards to today, until, or I wouldn't have experienced them if I didn't go back and do my further education in the college that was on the grounds of my school. I'm sure they probably had PCs in college, because college was like a little bit more kind of, you know, done properly out there, if you will. So that's, I see, that's why I think I always felt like I got kind of, you know, dealt a poor hand, in the sense that I never got to experience like proper machines. They spend this entire time in schools preparing you for the future, which would have been PCs. But if I'd left, well, when I had left school, because even though I went back, when I had left school, that tech wasn't even in the school. But this was, and obviously later on I talk about it in my nostalgic memories of PCs when I was a PC gamer and stuff like that. Did do work experience within this, you know, 2-year sixth form college course, which I think was, amongst other things, part of it was business studies, part of it was, there was a computer, hence the you know, the PCs, there was a computer element to it and stuff like that. It was all part and parcel, you know. And then obviously I went on to other things. No, this wasn't where my education ended. But yeah, I never would have got experience what was arguably the staple by the time I'd finished my legally required education, and you know, at that point could have gone on to a job where they would have had PCs, and I wouldn't have experienced them because I'd only experienced BBC Micros. But at the same time, I have very, very fond memories of it, because that is like, you know, my introduction. Obviously at home I had the Spectrum and I could play games and stuff like that, but they tried to install a little bit more, you know, kind of, you know, adult stuff into even as crude as some of these programs, applications, crude word processors and things like that were on the BBC Micro B. They were trying to prepare you for the future. I never did any of that shit at home. So, you know, I do have, you know, a massive, you know, warm, fuzzy feelings towards the computer experience that I gained in my primary school and my secondary school. So what I want to know is, dependent upon your age and whereabouts you are from, what were the machines? I'm pretty sure if you're British and you are my age, then your experience is going to be pretty similar to mine, which is, you know, the BBC Micro. Although, as I said, I have seen in my comment section on similar videos, although I've never really talked in depth this much about school, people talked about Amigas and Atari STs, but I think the staple one here for people of my age is going to be BBC Micros. But it can't be for everyone, and obviously the younger you are and the later you went to school, you know, I'm definitely more interested in knowing what you had. Possibly going to make me a little bit jealous. But yeah, I had to talk about this because it kind of came up at work when, like I said, I asked someone what, you know, what did they teach you computer science with at school? And it was like, oh, these fucking PCs, and we got to play fucking first person shooters and shit like that. You know, at lunch and in computer class. What did you get to play? Solitaire. So yeah, as always, I'd love to know what you think. Thank you very much for watching. I'll see you later.